Hello, Cinders and Cinderellas. My name is TP Sky, and welcome to Ashen, a game that was recently released on the new Epic Games Store. And it's a game that I've had my eye on for quite a little while, simply because it has a very interesting aesthetic. Now, I'm going to be going away tomorrow for a couple of days to be with my family for some Christmas time, which I'm quite excited for. So I was looking for a video topic that I could do to kind of tide the YouTube channel over until I can get back and maybe also get back to work. If you want to know about what's been going on with me specifically, there's a link to my vlog channel down in the description down below, where you will find out, the things that have been causing me to have some trouble uploading regularly this particular month. But anyway, Ashen, a game with a really interesting aesthetic. Now, let's start a little bit with the game design of the game. Before you decide to go out and buy it, this is a Dark Souls game, by which I don't mean, it's a game that's kind of like Dark Souls, but so far at least, and I'm only a couple of hours into the game, so maybe more twists into the formula will be introduced down the line, but so far, it's a game that is mechanically pretty much identical to Dark Souls, from the stamina bar that depletes when you run and the dodge roll that you use to evade in combat, to like the not relying on your shield being a good idea, to indeed the idea of having, a light attack and a more heavy attack that you can charge up, and you do lock on to characters when you engage them in dueling. It is a Dark Souls game. Mechanically, it is so similar as for the distinction to be kind of meaningless. Of course, there's one respect in which this game is nothing at all like Dark Souls whatsoever, and that is the gorgeous, gorgeous aesthetic, and indeed, the strange and faceless character models, which we're going to get into presently. But first, let's talk a little bit about the story conceit behind this particular game. So, the titular Ashen of the Ashen game is a magical bird of sorts that brings light to the world when it sits in the branches of the world tree. Essentially, it's the source of all light, and when the bird dies, which it does every once in a while, the world is plunged into a cycle of eternal darkness. And as Ashen opens, we have just been through a cycle of eternal darkness, which apparently just kind of sucked all around, and a new Ashen has now been reincarnated, a very young Ashen that is still vulnerable. And as players, our job, at least so far in the story, is to find the Ashen and to protect it from those who would wish to harm it. Because, of course, there is a secretive race of dark creatures that feed on darkness and would much prefer that the new Ashen is not allowed to fully reincarnate and bathe the world in light. So, from a lore perspective, you can see some similarities also to Dark Souls' idea, the whole thing of the Age of Fire and the Age of Darkness and yada yada yada. But it's realized through a very different aesthetic, where Dark Souls was all, dark Gothic European kind of, rise and fall of empires kind of thing, where, specifically you're dealing with the tragedy of the kingdoms of man, very much so, because you're playing as a human, or an undead. Ashen takes a much more Norse mythology-inspired approach. As I talked about, there's a world tree, which I believe was actually called Yggdrasil. And aesthetically as well, places us very much in much more of a sort of rural Northern Europe kind of Vikings and barbarians kind of situation than it places us in a high Gothic kind of, Central European, German, France, full of castles and castle towns and grand constructions and vaulted arches. These environments, at least the ones that I've seen so far... Whoop, hello. That's one of the tougher ones. There we go. These environments hew much more... There are ruins of human civilization and, old structures hanging around the place. But in general, this is a much more natural... There we go. It's a much more natural and natural feeling world. And it's a much more magic realism kind of world thing going on. Now, one of the things I like about Ashen, specifically as it relates to Dark Souls, its most obvious mechanical parallel, is the distinction that it enables us to draw between rendering and stylization. Now, rendering and stylization are not opposites and shouldn't be constructed as such, but we can use Dark Souls in comparison to Ashen to draw to explain the distinction between the two. Dark Souls is a rendered game. Like, its art style is highly rendered. That is to say, there's lots of textures, there's lots of details. It's essentially, the visuals of the game are attempting as close as possible to mirror something that looks not realistic necessarily, but looks real. That looks real, that looks grounded, that looks like if you had sufficient processing power to render the thing, it would look as though it could exist in some kind of real version of reality, or rather a magical version of reality. Ashen does not do this. Ashen doesn't look realistic in the least. There we go. Just gonna let my companion kill that guy. Aha. Thought you could sneak up on us, did you? Boom. Ashen does not attempt to render almost at all. Ashen stylizes. Hence, these characters. You can see these characters, unlike Dark Souls characters, and unfortunately I can't get a cursor into this game, these characters are... I probably shouldn't have healed. Let me see. I think I could find a... Yeah. These characters are essentially created from blocks of flat color, which then has shading thrown onto it. As you can see here, like they're very sort of simplistically colored. They look kind of like they would come out of a storybook of some kind, in fact. And of course, the complete removal of all facial features except facial hair on my stout companion over there does a lot to render a kind of unreality to the characters. Now, there's something to be said for the tabula rasa approach to character design that helps you, enables you to project yourself into a character by taking away many of the character traits that character otherwise has. But by taking away the faces, what the game manages to do is to specifically also take away the character's expressiveness, outside of their body language, of course, but they don't have facial expressions, ever. Which means it's a sort of reverse emoji kind of situation where if you want expressions on the character, you really do have to project them in there yourself, which I think is a really interesting approach to creating a player character. And one that's really kind of difficult to pull off because human faces are wired to look... human brains, rather, are wired to look for faces in things. It's called pareidolia. You may see subreddits dedicated to it, specifically the one called Faces in Things. The human brain is so hardwired to look for faces that we will see faces in light sockets or... Oh, hello. That's a spear girl. Hello. And that's an ambush. Another little Dark Souls tactic that you may be familiar with. As far as I can tell, there isn't any backstabbing in this game. That mechanic does not seem to have been ported over, or it could just be that I haven't been able to do it yet. Enemies seem to track you pretty one-to-one if you try and dodge around them. Pareidolia, which means human brains are hardwired to look for faces, and we will identify with anything that has a face. We will ascribe emotions to it, we will ascribe feelings to it, we will give it personality. Our brains will interpret personality into it just based on the expression that we read, even in inanimate objects that don't, objectively do not have expressions. Hello. Excuse me. Ow. And Ashen does the complete opposite. It removes our opportunity to find faces. It removes our opportunity to ascribe feelings to it. And all of it creates a really... I have a rather weird relationship with my character in this game, to be honest. Okay, I found my spark. That's nice. Keep hitting the wrong button. I have a rather strange relationship to the characters in these games because they don't really feel like people to me, which I believe is intentional. They feel less like people and much more like mythic characters, like they're characters in a play of a sort, or characters in some kind of a story that you are told from myth and legend. Which is a really interesting relationship to have to your characters, where the chosen undead in Dark Souls is highly customizable and you can give them whatever face you actually want. That's not really so much of an option in this game. You can give them facial hair, At most, you can change their hairstyle, you can change colors and stuff like that, but you can't give them an actual face. And so you deny yourself that connection to one of the most human things. And I thought that was quite interesting. Like, that's a really interesting way to do it. So, stylization versus rendering. Take a look at the way that the trees, for instance, are created here. There are no leaves on these trees. These are essentially just flat planes of color, rendered and sort of speckled in a nice little way, and then just kind of strung together to give the illusion of leaves being on the tree, but it also gives the trees this kind of painterly quality, dreamlike quality almost, that you don't really get from a game that painstakingly renders the leaves and gives them texture and gives them, you know, veins and structures and stuff like that. And you get this... The whole game feels very dreamlike. It feels like a very dreamlike aesthetic. And it feels less real, much less grounded, much less realistic than a Dark Souls game would. And I find that quite fascinating, interesting. Now, I do have a few... For all that I do enjoy, I really do like that this game looks so different from Dark Souls. Like, the tiresome thing about games that try to be Dark Souls is that they also tend to try and copy Dark Souls' kind of dark and gritty, highly rendered aesthetic as well, because they think that in order for the hardcore mechanics of Dark Souls, like those grounded, slow, careful, measured mechanics of a Dark Souls game to make sense, you have to have a grounded, sort of bulky, rough-looking aesthetic as well, which is simply not true, as this game very handily proves. And I mean, just look at it. Like, just look at you. This is a unique way to render a world, and it's a type of aesthetic that's been on the rise in indie games for quite a long time. Partly because it's a lot easier on a technical level to create character models and characters that look like this, rather than having 30 texture artists working around the clock to put really high resolution, unique textures on a million things in your environment and making it look as good as possible. Then just do this. I don't think it's cell shading necessarily. I don't actually think they're using cell shading, but because they have this flat color surface approach, you get a visual style that approximates cell shading in some interesting ways. I think the lighting system that they're using is a quite different one. Oh, and speaking of character design, this guy's freaking huge. And speaking of character design, here's a really interesting exercise, because, like I said, because the characters are faceless, and that includes my dude over here, you lose that connection to the personality. But take a look what he looks like. Take a look at his outfit. Take a look at the way he holds himself, and just the fact that he is so freaking huge. And you get a sense of someone who seems to have been through a lot, and whose arms seem to be turning to stone for some reason or another, and one of which has already fallen off. Now, he's not told me anything about why exactly it is that his skin is going gray, and one of his arms seems to have calcified entirely. But you do get the sense of an old, experienced warrior who's kind of seen everything and been everywhere. He's got these little lucky charms hanging around his belt. And because...
so I might awaken this sleeping stone.
Indeed. And because I'm denied access to the face, because I'm denied access to that emotional connection, I regard him less like a character and more like kind of a piece of artwork, almost like a mannequin, essentially. Like, the characters look like mannequins. That's really the thing that's going on with them, which allows their costuming, which allows their, their posture and the way that they're posed to act on behalf of their emotions much more than facial expressions would. And that's really interesting. I think there might be a longer video in that once I'm actually into Ashen. I don't know if Ashen itself, the game, the story, actually engages with any of these principles, or if it's just a neat aesthetic that they put on top of their video game. But because the game harkens towards a kind of Norse mythology, mythic past kind of idea of where the game is supposed to be going, I think there might be something in there about the anonymity of heroes that I'm quite curious to see.
To the ritual stone, bind your spirit to this place.
This, I think, is the revival mechanic in the game. As in, these are the bonfires, essentially. Town founded. You have claimed Vagrant's Rest. Interesting. So I founded a town, have I? Curious. Because one of the things that happened during the Age of Darkness in this particular world is that all the human empires and all the human civilizations just kind of fell apart and destroyed themselves because they kind of needed there to be light in order for their societies to hang together and work. And now that the Ashen has reincarnated, well, is there going to be an element of city building to this? That would certainly be an interesting twist on the Dark Souls formula.
I searched these foothills and found no sign of the Ashen. We must consult Geffen of the Birthing Waters. She will know where to look. Geffen can be found bathing within the Annex of Light. Bridge the waters and strike out for the cliffs. There lies your way in.
Interesting. Let's have a talk to my companion.
In my sleep, I hear my brother's voice. He once traveled this way with my father. I wasn't with them. Ahu was eldest, so it was his duty alone. Now he echoes through my slumber, calling to me. Each time is the same. He stands atop an old listener ruin, calling to me. I have found the ruin by the lakeside. Will you help me climb it?
Certainly. Again, don't know about where the game specifically is headed, but let's have a talk about the colors in this game, because as you can see, saturated colors are few and far between in this game. In fact, so far, the only places I've really seen saturated colors is in some of the hot elements, or indeed in the few little fires that I've found burning around various campsites in the game so far. And that creates a certain mood and aesthetics. Well, Ashen is a game that's very much about light. It's about bringing light back to the world, and it's about very bright, blinding white light, especially. That's what the Ashen emits onto the world. And I think this, rather, you can see even the sky is primarily gray, even though it's fairly cloudless. And I think this washed-out color palette, this washed-out color aesthetic, kind of sells the idea of this bright, kind of harsh light, but which is still kind of a pale light that isn't really, bringing out all the colors of the world yet. The world has been immersed in darkness for a very long time, and the idea of bringing colors back to the world through the light. Like, you get the sense that this is a desaturated world that has lacked color for a very long time. And, of course, also the fact that it seems to be permanently autumn in this particular area, with mostly reds and greens, rather reds and browns and, pale oranges used for the foliage. You also get the sensation of the temperature of the place. Like, it really does feel like it's kind of a cold, windswept, maybe a little bit damp, certainly not necessarily very comfortable place to live in the traditional Sons of the Lord. It doesn't really look like you could just kind of lie down and go to sleep on the ground and be comfortable that way. So, there is a map in this game, which is one of the other ways it differentiates itself from Dark Souls. You don't have, and you have, as you can see on the top of your screen there, you have this little ticker that shows you whichever objective you've got marked on the map in order to try and figure out where you need to be going. Which also helps. Dark Souls is a game that does a lot of the environmental storytelling in terms of, like, you're traveling through this place and you're kind of being guided by the level design in very specific ways that kind of guides you around the place. And it's not so much, at least of what I've played of the original Dark Souls so far, it's not so much a game of exploring, a large open world. But this game seems to be hearkening much more towards that kind of idea, where you have this large-ass area that you can run around in. And again, early times in the game for me, I don't know how much bigger the world gets, although judging by how much I can pan this map, it gets quite a bit larger indeed. This is much more of an open world approach to the general idea of Dark Souls that seem to be less interconnected. I would imagine that this thing will serve as a fast travel beacon eventually. But it certainly doesn't do that right now. Anyway, if you're looking for a recommendation about whether to buy the game, I think mechanically it replicates Dark Souls really well. So if you like Dark Souls games, I can comfortably recommend this game to you. Aesthetically, it's really, really interesting. If you like this painted kind of storybook-like aesthetic, something like those cliffs up there, look at that shit, that's fantastic. Then definitely just buy this game just to run around and have a look inside it. My feeling of it is that it's a long time commitment. I don't think you're going to be finishing this in any quick period of time, unless you're some kind of speedrunner, sorcerer, magician, doing speedrunnery, sorcery stuff. Which, if you are, more power to you, I suppose. But yeah, I quite like this. I also like the music. Listen to that. Yeah, it's a really interesting game. I'm looking forward to playing some more of it if I get time. Maybe I will in the new year. Maybe in the new year I'll start streaming regularly and maybe I'll play some games there. That might be a thing I'll do. Or maybe it won't be. Who knows? We'll find out together. But for now, if you've enjoyed this video, I would encourage you highly to click the like button down below. And there's also a subscribe button, which might show you when I upload more videos for you to watch. And then there's a bell icon that gives you a somewhat better chance of seeing the videos that I upload when I upload them to the channel. And also, when I post links to my Discord in the community tab, you'll see them there as well. Oh yeah, Patreon. I have a Patreon, which is scrolling on your screen right now. This is a thing I should probably remember that I have. If you want to help me out with rent and food and clothes and, you know, the general costs of living, then Patreon is one of the best places that you can do that. So if you have like $1 a month that you don't mind passing on to me, then I'd be very grateful to receive it. Although, of course, if you're not able to, don't even worry about it. If you prefer to do the one-time thing instead of doing the recurring thing, I do have a coffee, which is like a thing where you can donate in increments of $3 at a time. Essentially, air quotes, buying me a coffee. I don't drink coffee, so I'll probably spend it on hot cocoa or something instead. But if you want to do that, that is also an option now. I also have a vlog channel. Good lord, I have so many damn things I need to promote at the end of my videos nowadays. It's exhausting. I have a vlog channel, which I've been told I should be promoting more on the main channel so that people can find it and know about it. So there's a link to that in the description as well if you want to. That's mostly just me talking about my feelings and my life and stuff like that. It has, and sometimes I play video games over there as well while talking about my feelings and my life. So if that's interesting to you, you can go over there and also subscribe to that thing. Good lord. Self-promotion really is the worst part of my job, I'm not gonna lie. But thank you very much for watching the video this far. If you have not enjoyed it, of course, there's a dislike button down there below for you to click upon. Although I should warn you that the dislike button is young and it is a little frail. And it is recently awoken to its calling as a dislike button for the world. And if you click it, I ask that you be gentle. For if the dislike button should shatter, all the algorithms that hold together this world of the internet of ours will be brought to ruin, and the world shall enter a dark age of no Wi-Fi and no internet, from which empire shall fall, and we shall all be brought low unto the very deepest depths of our darkest days, until one day again a dislike button shall rise from the ashes and rekindle the fires of algorithm on YouTube, and on that day, finally, we all can return to watching We Are Number One remixes on repeat over and over and over again. Thank you very much for watching.